Okay, welcome to 444 call number 18. Couple things on the agenda today. Some spec stuff around SSZ, around the fee market, and then we can chat about where client teams are at and what makes sense in terms of potentially setting up a devnet. I guess first on the SSZ front, so we discussed this on All Core Devs last week. I think that the thing that came out of it is it seems really unlikely that there's a wholesale move to SSZ to happen in Cancun alongside 4844. So given 4844 is already a pretty big chunk of work, and moving everything to SSZ also would be quite significant. Teams felt like it probably makes sense to split those up. That said, because we are introducing some SSZ in 4844, we still sort of have this open question of like, what's the right format to use? So there seems to be this disagreement between whether we optimize for the storage size on a full node of transactions, or whether we optimize for the proof verification of transactions, and that results in two different SSZ encodings. We didn't get to solution or like agreement about that on All Core Devs, which I suspect is still the thing that's kind of blocking for us. But yeah, that's roughly where things are at. So it would be good that, you know, whatever we end up doing with 4844 is forward compatible with sort of broader SSZ roadmap. But we don't have consensus on that quite yet. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to reach consensus, I guess, without a lot more eyes on that sort of more broad proposal, I suppose.
Yeah. How big of a change is it to change the SSZ for? Because like, I suspect a lot of the engineering work is to just add SSZ support in the EL clients, period. But then, you know, if we only make this decision a month from now on All Core Devs, how big of a change is it to change, you know, the 4844 devnet at the time to a different like transaction structure?
Yeah, it shouldn't be too bad. I mean, I think the way it's specified right now, what's nice about it is we don't have to bring in like the entire SSZ protocol because it doesn't involve the Merkleization. But you know, I think most people have implemented the Merkleization anyway in their freaking consensus layer work, so bringing it in isn't all that bad. But yeah, I think that's the main thing. If it's just tweaks of the, you know, assuming we're going to bring in Merkleization anyway, and it's just tweaks of the layout, I don't think it's a whole lot. It does affect, well, it used to affect, I don't know if it still does given the latest tweaks, but it used to affect a little bit on the consensus layer side. I had to understand kind of where to extract the commitments in order to verify, but that's pretty minor.
Okay. Any other thoughts? If not, then yeah, I think the path forward is like I would leave the 4844 spec as is, and you know, potentially when we change this, then we make the change in 4844. But I just don't think, yeah, realistically, there's a way we can come to a decision. It's like a coin flip. Like I don't know that there's like a objectively better or worse approach. And yeah, wait until client teams have spent more time on it, figure out a decision. If we're lucky, we won't have to change things. If not, we just make the transaction format change once we have a broader SSZ consensus. And I guess Terrence, so the SSZ proposal, I assume this would be the transaction type as it's defined in the EIP, right? I'm trying to pull up the EIP right now. Yeah, so new transaction type. So this is basically the specific transaction type. And there's some other discussions happening around, like, potentially changing the withdrawal route on the EL to SSD and stuff like that. But again, it's like, once we make all those decisions, if I don't know the withdrawal route would affect the transaction type, I don't see how. But yeah, we can retrofit this EIP to just be in line with things. But yeah.
Okay, did I hear that right? So just stick with the existing specification?
Until there's a change, if there is one, basically. Yeah, unless someone here has like a strong objection, but doesn't seem like we do. And okay, so yeah, stick with the current transaction type, and yeah, we'll know once there's a decision made on the broader SSD discussion. Okay, next up, Terrence, you posted this ETH research post. Roberto, you independently sent it to me as well. The fee market analysis. I unfortunately haven't had time to read it yet. I don't know, Terrence or Roberto, do either of you want to give a quick overview and share your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Roberto.
No, you go ahead, Terrence. It's fine.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, so I think overall it's a very, very good post, and I highly encourage people to read it, because this is kind of one of the lesser known design space that people have been working on, and it's definitely something that we do want to get right initially, because I feel like we don't get this initial mini data guess set correctly, then we may be encouraging spamming applications. And then this is something that unfortunately we definitely want to get it right as early as possible. So basically the summary of the post is essentially saying that given the layer 2 demands today, that it will take 1 to 1.5 years for the usage to reach the target data gas price threshold, basically. So given that, whether it's worth raising the minimum price, because we want to deter spamming applications, basically applications that's using data gas for the wrong reason. And then because it's hard once they start using it, then it's gonna be hard to move them away later, right? And then another thing the post pointing out is that it kind of assumes the layer 2 their current usage is inelastic, but I will argue it's more elastic than people think, because of layer 2 users pays data gas, and the data gas is also a function of the as a function as the layer 1 code data. So that's my main argument. Other than that, the post is great. We definitely want more eyes on it.
Yeah, that's a good summary, Terrence. I left a little comment, I guess, with some of those points at the bottom there. It's good food for thought, though. I don't know if Donkrad is here, but I know in the past he's suggested raising the minimum as well, so he would be a good person to hear from on this topic. I don't think I have a strong opinion. I did push back a little bit, though. I mean, I think ideally we'd want the market to be able to determine the appropriate minimum price. But one concern I have with the current proposal, it's a little underspecified. Like it doesn't, not that proposal, but EIP-4844 itself doesn't actually specify what happens if there's a lot more blobs kind of pending in the mempool than there's available space. Like an EIP-1559, we know that we have a priority fee. We can sort by that, and nodes are incentivized to do so. The obvious option with 4844 is to sort by max fee per data gas. But since there's no priority fee, there's no incentives for nodes to actually do that. But then again, I guess there's not really incentives for nodes not to do that either. So perhaps that's fine.
Right.
I guess Mofi's pointing out that the priority fee applies here too. That's true, but that's I guess that's on regular gas. So, but I guess it's still used to rank.
Yeah, it applies here too, because even though they're two separate markets, it's the same, like it's the same person that's selling the I guess the product. So you can just use priority fee we use for compute gas and bump up your data gas to get shoved in.
Got it. That makes sense. So if I'm competing for blob space when we're in the saturated mode, the 1559 priority fee kind of can serve that same purpose. Is that the argument?
So, and I guess the biggest difference, so I'm skimming the post now, the biggest difference, I guess, with 1559 here is that when we deployed 1559, the blocks were full already. So, you know, it was a question of like oh, yeah, Mofi, do you want to answer to Roberto?
I missed this question. I lost audio for a couple.
Okay.
Oh, I was just repeating your point to confirm that I got it right, which is that the priority fee from 1559 can kind of serve the same purpose for the saturated blob case. One could just bump that up, and so that's sort of the prioritization rule.
Yeah, totally.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Right, and I guess, and then from the post, so one of the challenges is because the blobs will not be full, the price will be, I don't know if I want to say artificially low, but it'll be lower, or at least, yeah, for a while the price would like remain somewhat low because blobs won't be fully utilized, and this is different the blocks where prior to 1559 they were fully utilized, so like it took a couple minutes to just find the right market price again. Yeah, Proto.
So I think it's a very strong statement to say that the blobs won't be full, like fully utilized.
Okay.
Like today, the only reason why blobs use the amount of data that they do is because we're already max out the gas in Ethereum to like versus the demand that there is in like fees.
Right.
And right now these rollups, including Optimism, they're paying well over 90% of their fees towards data already. So we know that users are willing to pay like a premium to pay for data. Now, if there was more data to provide to them and at a lower cost, I think it's very reasonable to think that those fees that they are currently being utilized for less resources would go towards like utilizing all those resources, fitting the blobs.
Yeah, that's a similar point that I had made in there. Do you feel, Proto, that I mean, the end result is that when this does go live, we're not going to be in a situation where we're kind of min pricing for a year and a half?
So
at the TLDR, I guess.
I think a year or even half a year is already quite long. I do expect it to be like unstable for at least a week or longer, where it is quite a jump in in going from the current amount of data to the different type of data. So it will take a while for usage to adapt to oh, we can make more transactions, or we can call this contract more often. These type of things that have to be they find their way in the market, but I don't think it will be instant.
Right, but we don't need it to be instant, right? It's kind of
Pretty much.
I guess what I'm trying to ask more concretely to you, do you feel that the proposal is fine as is with the minimum 1 data gas fee?
So personally, I'm more of a maximalist of markets, where markets can price these things. I do believe that there's a certain lower bound for safety reasons. So if people are concerned that the markets don't find a right price for this, we can set at least some minimum that makes sense for the protocol to sustain this. But then beyond that, I'm in favor of just not biasing the fee markets too much.
I wonder if there's a way to set the minimum. I get to do some sort of mapping towards what's the real economic cost of running this data. Obviously we can know the relative cost with gas prices, but is there some minimum? But again, that's hard though, because you're back to the ETH USD exchange rate. We could set a minimum that targets roughly the real world processing fiat cost of sending over the data, but we're going to set this minimum in ETH, and so that's kind of anchored to whatever the ETH price is when you deploy the EIP. Yeah. And I guess this is also something that you could imagine. I guess there's two ways you can go about it. One is either you trust the market to start, and assuming that the minimum was too low, you can then also change the transaction pool rules and stuff without doing a hard fork, to make it slightly harder to get these minimum fee transactions in. Or but you can't do the other approach, right? If we set a high minimum in the protocol, there's no way to then change things if we think it's too high rather than a hard fork. So I don't know, this sort of makes me lean towards not having a minimum, or keeping the minimum of one way, because worst case clients could just each hard code in their transaction pool that they're not going to accept transactions with a one-way price or something like that. Yeah. I guess, does anyone feel strongly that we should that we should have this higher minimum?
I think a higher minimum is fine, as long as there's a case for why this minimum pays for certain security guarantees. Because I do think with the target mechanism, we know and understand the throughput, and this type of resource is bounded to a limited amount of time. So all of that combined, I think it's very reasonable for us to take low fees on these blobs.
So, sorry, are you arguing that we should raise the minimum or leave it as is?
I'm arguing that we shouldn't need the minimum, given that the resource limiting is bound. The whole thing, we know how much bandwidth it will take. If it is if it stays under the target, we know how much storage it will take, and we know that there is a bound to this after like 18 days that this data starts to get pruned.
Yeah.
So even if there's a spike in throughput, this bike will pay for it with the price adjustments. And if there is a consistently below target throughput, then sure, the blobs are cheap, but it is within our like model of what kind of resources are going to be used for this. And after 18 days, it's all gone again. So like this is not a persistent cost to Ethereum.
Yeah, I'm happy to not change the minimum bid as is. Does anyone disagree strongly with that? Okay. Anything else on the specs? Okay, then
sorry, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
going back to the minimum thing. The thing I don't understand is, given we have such a small number of blob transactions that are going to get into blocks, I don't really, and maybe this is just me, I need to understand the better 1559 mechanism, but do we have any concern that the 1559 mechanism won't work as well here because of that small number of transactions? Like, won't we just immediately go up to like a really, really high price or stay at a very, very low price?
So the
No,
precision of the mechanism is smaller, like there's discrete steps of full blobs. So it doesn't adjust like a smooth curve like EIP-4844, but the curve is there, like it does adjust the way you would expect it to adjust. And so over a long enough time frame, if the usage targets some amount of blob throughput, it will find like a price that reflects that.
Doesn't the curve also look at the target usage since like the introduction of blobs rather than just the last block, right?
It's sticky, yes. So when you start pruning blobs, it's like it doesn't take in account the removal of these blobs. But overall, like if you look at 18 days worth of blob data, this is quite insignificant. This like this small change in like the whether or not the excess is met. Like if the excess is truly too expensive, then you'll just see empty blocks for a little while, and we'll go back down the price for the blobs.
Yeah,
This discussion has been had before in the EIP about I think in the original EIP that's changed it to like from this base fee like mechanism, or no, I think you'd have to dig up the PR number, but when we refactored the fee market, we had this whole discussion about how the price adjustment should account for like the pruning.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm nervous about the one Gwei thing. It just feels like we're leaving a lot of value on the table for Ethereum that we could be capturing. And it feels to me like we should be doing something like what Tim suggested, where we do like an analysis of how much does this actually cost the network, or something to set a minimum gas price.
But yeah, so the problem with that analysis though is you can get, some fiat costs, but then the network doesn't know that, right? Like the network only knows the price, right? It doesn't even know the price of ETH. It only knows
it could give us an order of magnitude.
Right. Yeah. And then the other thing is like how I think to me the most convincing argument in that post is if the cold start problem actually is like a year long, right? Like whereas if we're talking like days to weeks or minutes to hours, then like I don't think it matters. If we're talking for a year, then yeah, like it probably does make sense to have a minimum price because we do hard fork more than once a year. We can change that minimum price roughly on that schedule. Yeah, Pro.
So another like thing for context or as example would be to think about the Shanghai denial of service attacks, like not the not the one for the hard fork, but like the original ones.
Yeah.
When there was this type of like DOS. I believe you can still see it in like when you sync like full sync a node and see like this slowdown for a bit. Like this like gas usage is persistent, whereas these blobs after 18 days were done. So even if they're misused at a low gas price, like sure, price will creep up. Maybe it creeps up too slowly, but it will creep up.
Yeah.
And the data will get removed eventually, and it won't be like an obligation to Ethereum anymore. So like there's a very different type of long-term cost than the gas resource.
Solis?
Yeah, so hi. I was thinking, one thing that we may wait a bit until this 4844 is deployed on some testnet and some potential users starts to use it, because in my understanding there may be some users, even not rollups, that are going to use these blob transactions. So I mean, maybe there is actually much bigger usage than we expect currently, or is it, or we are 100% sure that there will be under usage for the first year or something like that.
I think a lot of people are questioning that assumption that there'll be no low usage for a year. That's, I mean, certainly, I would be surprised if there were more users popping up taking advantage of this feature.
Okay, so even now there isn't much other greater ways to use these blob transactions. Okay, but if I understand correctly, the worst what could happen is that well, somebody will spam at the full capacity of what network should handle. So in worst case, well, nothing bad happens, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, there's a max 4 blobs per block, so
Yeah.
I think that kind of handles the spam case pretty effectively.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
what the worst scenario is that we have some temporary spam, which doesn't generate much revenue for the network in terms of fees, but it kind of tests the capabilities of the network, and this is the worst case scenario,
And I'll push back on the even it doesn't generate fees, because if you have a lot of spam, then it starts competing for blob space, and so the price starts going up, and so it does generate a lot of fees. Like spam is almost like a, and that this is like more, I guess, on the research post, but it's like spam is almost like a weird way to put it, because it's like if the transaction price is low, people are like bidding it up, but then once it gets bid up, what's the difference between that and real usage? They're like paying for the transactions. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, in any case, it's a temporary. I mean, the blob data will be purchased after a while. So I mean, I understand that this discussion in general. This is interesting, but I personally don't see too much of the damage of if it happens that the fees are too low, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, so I guess what makes sense is the next step. Like the post is still quite new on ETH research. We can see if there's more conversation on it, but it doesn't seem like it warrants an urgent change to the spec.
Yeah, I agree. So I already left my thoughts on there. I would love to see other people that have made orthogonal or similar points to kind of just maybe we'll just continue the discussion there. It doesn't seem like there's a rush to need to do anything though.
Yeah, I'll link the recording of this call once it's up on the thread, so people can see this discussion as well. Cool. Any other spec related issues? Okay, if not, on the client side, so on the last call, we sort of discussed that, you know, we probably had 2 to 4 weeks of implementation time, and obviously with Shanghai coming out, it wasn't clear if we wanted to get it that stood up before the Shanghai releases were out or wait until that's done. So we have kind of this good foundation to build off. Yeah, does anyone have thoughts on this, or just, you know, want to share their progress over the past couple of weeks?
I can share a quick progress on the Prism side. We are still working on decoupling blocks and blob. I started running local devnet last week, and then I ran into a few issues with Geth. I believe it's fixed, so I need to retry it. But yeah, I think majority of our resources are in Chapella right now. So I think after like 1 week, we will have more people looking into this. But yeah, I think we're probably on track for like multi-client testnet maybe in like 2 weeks from today. I think that's a good target from us. But yeah, that's where we are.
Cool. And would that use basically that would build on top of the Chapella releases, right? I assume if it's 2 weeks from today. Yeah.
Yeah,
nice.
exactly.
Terrence, did you figure out, was that, you said you were seeing an all state route, I guess? Is that still
Right? I haven't tested yet. So yeah, that's on my to-do today.
Okay, great, thanks.
So on Lodestar side, Lodestar is sort of ready in the sense that without including the changes to the blob signing and blocks and blob signing endpoints, basically where we are right now, we are just independently fetching and signing and publishing the blobs. So without the latest discussed changes in the signing endpoints, we are sort of ready to basically sync with any other client that is out there. Locally, I have been able to run a devnet where there have been 2 nodes which basically were running sync. They were blob transactions, and then there was a 3rd node that could sync from request response and then would also accept blobs from gossip once it got synced. So we are sort of right now in the review stage of our work, and definitely when the PR for blob signing endpoints is sort of clear with respect to beacon APIs, then we can get that into the Lodestar work as well. But even without that, we are sort of ready to do a multi-client devnet or testnet.
Nice.
So for Lighthouse, we've made a lot of progress on our decoupling implementation, but we still don't have something that's like fully workable. I'd say that's our goal for this week, is to get something that we can actually start testing with locally. But yeah, it's more or less it for us.
Nevermind looks like has an implementation that works with Lodestar in pair with Lodestar, but we of course would be happy to participate in some multi-client network with this update. Right?
CKZG work is going well. We've just been focusing on cleanup and stuff for the past week. Reminder to client teams that the audit will start pretty soon. Currently it's planned for April 17th, but we're asking the client teams finalize their code like a week or 2 before then. So if you want a date like before April 5th would be great.
On Teco side, we are not yet in full speed on 4844. But we are progressing a bit. Hopefully at full speed this week after releasing the mainnet for Shanghai. And Yeah, we're working currently in these mostly in the syncing and blocking part, and we are starting working on the signing of blobs in the VC side, but we still need to start working on the Beacon node APIs for the signing. Waiting for things to settle there. Yeah, that's an update for us.
Anyone else? Okay, so I guess, does it make sense to, keep working on the implementations, maybe start some smaller devnets in the next 2 weeks if we can, and then maybe try to use the next call to coordinate the launch of like a longer lived devnet? I'm not sure what number we're at, but and I feel like by that point as well, maybe that longer lived devnet also ends up being sort of a Shanghai or sort of a Cancun devnet that we can start, potentially adding other stuff to in the future. But yeah, it seems like taking the time to polish implementations and then putting together something that's a bit longer lived would work with the different teams. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Anything else anyone wanted to chat about? Okay, well, yeah, we can wrap up here. Thanks everyone, and yeah, we'll have the same call in 2 weeks.
Bye, everyone.
See you guys.
Thanks. Bye.